All right, ladies and gentlemen, 1 week from tonight, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will square off once again, each candidate claiming victory in debate number 1.
Well, I think his demeanor, his temperament, his behavior on the stage could be seen by everybody, and people can draw their own conclusions.
She's the candidate of yesterday, and ours is the campaign, and we're the people of the future.
Your take on the debate, and what do you think about the race for the White House, Jimmy Mathis?
The debate I can sum up in one word: forgettable. Moving forward, nobody's going to look back. Nobody lost this debate. There is not, sir, you're no Jack Kennedy. It's uneventful. It will have no effect on the outcome of this election.
New panelist, ladies and gentlemen, Len Foxwell. He's a 30-year viewer of Square Off and first-time participant.
I finally made it here.
Yeah, well, this is the big time. What's your take on the debate?
I think Hillary won on points. I don't think it was a knockout. And she displayed all the characteristics that you would want in a president, but ultimately, I don't know how much it moves the needle.
All right, Anthony McCarthy.
Well, I think we're so polarized as a nation, no one really lost that debate. Hillary kept her supporters, maybe a little bit more enthusiasm, but Donald Trump held his own and was able to meet that very low bar that people set for him.
Nicole Ambrose.
Well, wow, this is the year of the political playbook being totally thrown out. But all that said, I mean, Trump's numbers keep going up in the daily tracking polls, so apparently people really liked it.
All right, look at that. Look in your eyes, glazed look. Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Scher. Welcome to Square Off, and we're brought to you by the law offices of Peter Angelos. You know, they are large enough to take on the hospitals, the insurance companies, get a victory for you in the courtroom. Call 1-800-556-5522, the law offices of Peter Angelos, Orioles owner, and you'll be glad you did.
Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
Wrong.
proved over and over again.
Wrong.
All right, go ahead. I'm going to let you speak first, Nick.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, so just in general, I think Trump did really well in the first half hour. I think, you know, trade is a strength. I think he did a great job. I thought the kind of last 60 minutes of the debate was just too long, was tedious on both counts. I just wanted to see more issues addressed. I wanted to see the things I really care about, like national security. To me, Hillary Clinton has totally failed on national security. If you look at the Syrian refugee crisis, the failure of the Syrian Red Line, the Iranian nuclear deal, how the world is going to hell in a handbasket, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. She has not just made the world a more dangerous place, but her policy decisions have directly resulted in hundreds of thousands of people being displaced or killed.
There are 3 other panelists.
Well, I will say this about the debate. I agree with you about the length. I agree Donald Trump did extraordinarily well in the first half hour. Right. He held his own. He really is talking about the issues that a lot of people want to hear. But on preparation, on presentation, she aced it. She really seemed presidential. We knew, tick-tock, he was going to lose it. He had a meltdown after the first 30 minutes, and that's what we typically expected from Donald Trump. That's not the man that we need to have, as Hillary said, with his finger on that red button.
People don't trust Hillary, and I don't think they actually appreciate her preparation.
Well, I don't think we did hear about the issues. I don't remember the Affordable Care Act coming up at all, which led to the Republicans taking the House back in 2010. And then the Senate, right now, you have premiums are going up by 20%. Millions of people are being driven to Medicaid. That didn't come up. A touch and go on the email scandal. Little to nothing on the Iranian nuclear deal. We're talking about national security, not just fast-tracking one of the biggest terrorist states on the planet to a nuclear weapon, then giving them an intercontinental ballistic missile to reach America.
1 second.
And Lester Holt, I'm sorry, failed miserably last week. And if it wasn't for Donald Trump doing a little bit of a pushback, he should have been more on the offense and not defending himself over these massive issues.
Mr. Foxwell.
Let's be honest. 85 million people did not tune into this debate to hear a discussion about nuclear proliferation or our nation's crumbling infrastructure, or any of the other serious policy matters that the next president of the United States is going to have to address. This debate, for better or for worse, was reflective of a political culture and a society that just wants to be entertained.
You're absolutely right.
This is entertainment television.
And that's what he did in the first 30 minutes. Then go ahead and clubber like a baby seal. That's the reason why 80 million people tuned in. Then go ahead and deliver.
I agree with each of you. I think the first 14 minutes or so was his finest. I think for the first time we saw some semblance of a political strategy where he seemed to be micro-targeting voters in the Rust Belt of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. But as is so often the case with Donald Trump, he lost it, and before the evening was over, we were wandering into the thickets of Sidney Blumenthal and Alicia Machado and some other things that were just wholly irrelevant.
Well, I mean, a lot of this was Hillary having her personal attack, and I thought actually you have to give Donald points for neglecting all of the personal attacks that Hillary's train wreckage of 45 years in the public eye has led to. From time she first arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1971, she was fired for ethics problems from
the
House
Watergate,
Judiciary.
Right.
So in 1971, this is a woman who's left wreckage for 45 years, and I really give Democrats points who admit she is so deeply flawed.
I think that this is real inside politics, but that's what the show is about. All of the things that you're talking about, the American people obviously don't care. What they care about is, no, let me finish. What they do care about is jobs and unemployment. Right. They want a strong border, and they want immigration policy. They have a long laundry list, and to his credit, Donald Trump is speaking to that.
But not last week. We didn't hear, but we didn't hear him talk about the wall.
I'm glad he didn't.
When he's talking, but no, but that's what's landed and what has had him leading the pack for the last 14 months. And even on trade, something that people in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, our unfair trade deals has hurt these people very much. Where is Donald Trump talking about bringing down regulation domestically? Things that we can...
I actually thought he did talk a lot about regulation. He clearly does best when he says, 1, I'll keep you safe, 2, I'll manage the government better, and 3, I'll bring you jobs.
So why didn't he stay on that? Why is he humanly incapable of staying on point?
That's all I want him to talk.